Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started with the last session of the day. And it kicks off with Sasha Laundy telling us about our Brains API. Let's welcome her.
Hi, thanks for coming. So the title of my talk is Your Brains API, Giving and Getting Technical Help. Another title I could have picked for it was Getting Technical Help Without Being Scared and Giving Technical Help Without Being a Jerk Accidentally. But that was a little long to fit into the form. I guess I could have abbreviated it, but I thought this would be even less clear. So it's called Your Brains API, Giving and Getting Technical Help. I first discovered that asking can be really hard when I was 20 in my physics seminar. I majored in physics, and we had this class once a week where we got together for 3 hours and talked about what we'd learned that week, what we'd read about, what problems we'd worked on. And I had this distinct memory of sitting in this class, and the professor was talking about some section of the book that I just hadn't read. I couldn't figure out where we were, and I sort of asked the guy to my left, I was like, hey, what chapter is this? He was like, I don't know, but he looked like he knew what was going on. The guy to my right looked like he knew what was going on too. So I was like, hey, where are we? And he was like, I don't know. So I was like, hi, what section are we on? And I had to ask the question. But that was really hard, that dynamic in that particular department, because I always had to be the one who was asking the question, even though no one else knew what was going on either. And that was really tough for me emotionally. I also learned that helping can be really hard, because I went on to teach physics and neuroscience for 5 years after that. And it's the hardest job I'll probably ever have. I taught 9th grade physics first, and the kids come in with a really well-formed sense of who they are already, what kind of student they are, whether they're a math person or a science person, and what they like. And part of my job was to take those people who didn't think they were math and science people and make them love science. And that was very challenging. I also learned how huge this can be, what a big impact. So when I transitioned into the tech industry, my first job was at Twilio. And we had an angry customer write in once. He sent this very angry email in. And I was thinking about it and kind of took it personally at first. I was like, why is he so angry at us? We're trying to provide this great API for him. And I asked him a few questions and provided him some help that he needed. And he turned into someone who actually sent 3 positive tweets about us by the end of it. And I realized that the way you give help can really have a big impact on someone. And someone who's writing to you angry actually cares, and it's possible to turn them around with a few questions. So helping in the right way can really make a big difference. I also want to argue that how you help is culture. It's the culture of your community, like the Python community. It's the culture of your company or your school or your group. And the way that you help people and give help and the way that you ask for help is an integral part of your culture. I also learned this as a teacher when I taught the second half of an advanced physics class. The first half was taught by a different teacher, but the same group of kids. It was about half boys, half girls. I taught them electricity and magnetism. And the kids came in with this very interesting dynamic that's fairly common. The boys would blurt out and answer questions that I asked in class, and the girls would raise their hand and then get shouted over and then not say the thing they were going to say. And when it was lab time, I would say, hey, the material's over here, here's the lab handout, here's what you need to do, go for it. The boys would run over, grab the equipment, and the girls would sit and wait for them to come back. And so this kind of got to me for kind of obvious reasons. And I did some reading about it, I did some thinking about it, and I made some really subtle tweaks to how I interacted with them in the classroom. For example, one of those tweaks was, I read some research that showed that teachers are rushed to help girls more quickly than they help boys. They let the boys struggle a little bit more with the work they're doing and implicitly send a signal that the boys are more capable and will figure it out. And so I looked at that research and a few other bits of research and tweaked some things, and the kids never even knew about this. But after about 6 weeks of this, everyone was raising their hand and waiting to speak. And I had girls and boys going to get the equipment in a much more manageable way. And so it really turned the culture and feel of the class around. And so this is where I learned how big helping can really make a difference in how the whole organization, the whole group feels. And actually, as I was transitioning into the tech industry from teaching, I actually had such a rough time with this at iOS meetups, at Python meetups in San Francisco, that I actually started an organization that would do a better job of this, because it meant so much to me and I wanted that space in my life so much. I also jumped ship when I got an opportunity to work at Codecademy in the early days. because I really thought that Codecademy has this potential to change the face of who is programming and make it much more friendly and accessible, because we had so many millions of users who love the friendly tone and voice of Codecademy. And so I took the site from one lesson with a few steps in it to 6 tracks with all the different languages fully fleshed out. And that was really rewarding to see what sorts of people loved engaging with programming when it was given a friendly face. It was also a really great experience to land at the Recurse Center, formerly known as Hacker School. This is a 12-week retreat for programmers in New York City. It's a great experience. We've got some Hacker Schoolers in the audience here today. And the culture there is fantastic. They maniacally focus on it. The facilitators there are very thoughtful about how they put it together and have done an amazing job of creating a great culture of learning and giving and getting technical help. One symptom of this good culture is that instead of getting an error in your code and going, damn, my code doesn't work, and shaking your fist, instead you start hearing things like this. Oh, I got an error in my code. How interesting. I didn't expect that. I have something to learn. And this is a really good symptom of a good culture, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. They also have some social rules that serve as social guide rails so you don't accidentally hurt yourself, and we'll talk about those a little bit later as well. I currently work at a place called Polynumeral in New York City. We're starting a data science consultancy, and we really focus on culture as one of our things we really focus on in terms of learning and getting better, and we're trying to create a good place for this. Because culture really is a competitive advantage, and if you can do this really well, you can hire amazing people. You can take junior folks and grow them into amazing, amazing senior folks. And so culture really is a competitive advantage, and I think all the stuff I'm going to talk about, asking, helping, all these sorts of things, really play into this today. So before I get started on that, why are you here? You had several options, and lots of places in Montreal you could be right now. Why did you choose this particular talk to come to? I just want to make sure you think about that, because there are a lot of different answers to this. You could, for example, want to speed up your own growth, your own learning. You could be struggling with how to get unstuck when you're stuck on a tough problem. You could be working on getting better at mentoring, or maybe you're having trouble with a particular person at your work or in your community. So take a second. Why are you in this particular talk? What do you want to take away from it? So today, we're going to talk about asking and helping, and I'm going to give you some specific tools for making those two things easier, because they can be really challenging. But first, let's talk about the little voice. So many of you might identify with this, of having a little voice in your head that says things like, I'm never going to get good at this, or this is so hard and I keep getting stuck, maybe I'm not cut out for this. How many of you identify with this little voice in some way? Great, I'm seeing lots of hands. I do too. Really effective leaders and mentors and teachers know about the little voice, and they work with it instead of against it. So this is a boy named Vidal from New York City. And Vidal was photographed by this photographer who runs a blog called Humans of New York. And Humans of New York, he's this guy who goes around New York and takes pictures of interesting people, and then or sometimes not interesting looking people, just boring looking people, but he has this amazing ability to pull out very interesting little snippets of their life and their backstory. And he talked to this boy Vidal and asked him, who influenced you the most in your life? And he said, my principal, Ms. Lopez. How has she influenced you? When we get in trouble, she doesn't suspend us. She calls us to her office and explains to us how society was built down around us. And one time she made every student stand up, one at a time, and she told us that each one of us matters. So Ms. Lopez is clearly a very talented administrator and educator and made a big impact on this boy. And if this sounds familiar to you, it's because this story went viral and they raised $1 million for their school, and it's a pretty amazing story, and it got to highlight the work that the educators and administrators at the school are doing. So Ms. Lopez knows this and works with this, and it's important to know this about the people that are around you as well. All the folks who are thinking, when I get up on stage at PyCon, what are they all going to think of me? And it's important to acknowledge that everyone has this little voice, but it's different for some people. Life experience and cultural forces shape the sorts of things our little voice might say to us, and the specific worries that we might have, and that may not be visible to when you're looking at someone else. XKCD did a great comic on this, and I'll let him speak for me here. This is referencing tokenism, which is an area of research that's been done since the 70s. Hasn't yet made it into the tech industry knowing about this. But if you're one of a very small number in a community or in an event, what you do, you take on that burden of not just being judged yourself, but being judged as a part of the group you're from. And this goes away once you take up more of the space in the room and more people around you look like you. So you never know what sorts of little voices people have going through their head, and you really need to know that before you can talk to them effectively. So remember the little voice. Askers, fight the little voice. Don't let it win. And helpers, you need to know that this is what's happening in their heads, and they may not ever tell you about it. This is really important because if they're afraid to ask for help, it stops them from stretching. And if you don't stretch, you don't grow. And your team stagnates, you can't build amazing things. So pay attention to the little voice. So without further ado, let's talk about asking. And first, let's talk a little bit about the mindset of asking, and then about some specific tools that you can use to make it more useful. So first of all, remember that even though if you're talking to a super senior person, you know some stuff, and they know some stuff, and you know some of the same stuff, but it doesn't mean they have like infinitely more knowledge than you about everything. You just have overlapping knowledge. You may know a lot of stuff about stuff they don't know about. So remember this when you go and talk to them. Also, if you're confused, if your code has just done something you didn't expect, that's a sign you're about to learn something new, that your mental model was not correct, and you're about to learn the correct one. And last of all, be brave. It's scary sometimes. Do it anyway. You just got to push through. Here are some tools that you can use for asking. So first, find a good place to work. This sounds kind of flippant, and I totally acknowledge all the privilege that we have in this community of having a lot of options about the types of places that we work. But I just want to put this one up here, and it's sort of like a base level importance one, because if you are in a toxic culture, no matter how good you get at asking and no matter how brave you are, you're going to have a bad time. And one thing that's very important is the people at the top really set the leaders, the founders, they really set the culture. So pay attention to the leaders and the founders next time you're interviewing. You can ask lots of questions that get at this, so you know you're ending up in a good place. This is really, really key. Second thing is to ask early. This is one I really struggled with when I was in the first few months of my job. I would wait, I was like, I can figure this out, I know I can, and I would like look at Google Stack Overflow docs, I would try different things, and I would like wait about an hour to ask for help. And my boss finally talked to me and was like, you need to ask earlier. I don't mind, just interrupt me, but you have to ask earlier or we can't move as fast. And I hadn't really seen it in the whole team frame that way, so that was a really important moment, and it's really hard, but I've started asking for help earlier on. The third thing you can do is demonstrate competence, because experts actually really like helping people who will take the ball and run with it and build something amazing on their advice, and people who follow up. So be confident and demonstrate competence. One way you can do this is by auditing your speech patterns. Instead of saying, well, I mean, I don't really know, but what do you think? You can just say, what do you think? And sort of chop that off. This one's also really challenging. To this day, I still go through emails to my team when I'm suggesting a new course of action, and I delete all the I thinks. I just say what I think and delete the I thinks, but I still have to go through and edit that out. This one's a really tough one. You can also tell them what you need. So say what kind of help you want and you don't want at that particular moment. And this can take a lot of forms, but I'm going to show you a magic trick that has really changed things for me. I use this one all the time. My whole team uses it now too. And that's this magic of 30% feedback. It's basically telling the person how much done the thing is that you're asking for feedback on so they can frame that accordingly. If it's 90% done, they're just going to fix some typos, change some wording, and throw it out the door. But if it's 10 or 30% done, then they can say to you, hey, you're taking the totally wrong approach on this, or there's this huge thing you've missed, or whatever, and you can end up with a much better final product. So literally we use this. I say like, hey, I'm working on this thing, it's 30% done, could you take a look and tell me what you think? And they're like, okay, and then I get feedback back that's the kind I'm expecting, because this mismatch can be really challenging to navigate. This is seriously magic. If you remember nothing else from this talk, please use this one. Oh, the other thing this frees you up for is, for all the perfectionists in the room, this frees you up to show stuff that's not done, that's messy, that's incomplete, that's a sketch. And one question I gave this talk a week or so ago, one question I got that I thought was really excellent is, that they're in a place that they were having trouble with this one, essentially. And the advice that they liked was that the form factor of the thing you're asking for feedback on tells information about how done it is. So if you're sketching up a product, for example, instead of doing like photoshopped pixel perfect sketches, actually just do something on a whiteboard or a napkin and show it to them. The form factor of the thing you're showing someone tells them what kind of feedback you want. So when I'm sending emails to a client or to someone, an important email, and I'm just drafting it, I'll leave in all the typos, I'll leave everything lowercase, just so it's clear that I'm not about to hit send, and people will give me different kinds of feedback on it. One thing you can do as well is to say what you've already done. So you can say, I already tried using this data structure instead of this one, I tried looking it up on Stack Overflow, and I read the docs, but I didn't really understand this particular section. You can give a history of what you've already done. There's a lot of examples of doing this poorly on Stack Overflow. People are like, I have a type error, help. Full stop. Like, that's it. That's the whole thing, right? And that's impossible to help that person because you have no idea what they're working on. So give some sense of what you've already done, and that can really help you get a better answer out of people. Here's a little script that you can use as well. This says, my current understanding is, bleh, I expect to see bleh, but instead it's doing bleh. What should I do? So this shows what you're expecting to happen and then what you saw, and it gives you a way of asking about the difference. So that the person helping you isn't trying to guess what you're thinking, or it tells you something you already know, or whatever, they can zero in the part you need help on. You can also say, I want to do bleh, and I'm trying it by doing bleh. What do you think about this approach? This is particularly useful at the beginning of a product where you're not sure which tool you should pick up or which machine learning algorithm you should use or whatever. This is really good in the early stages. And then at the end, once you've gotten help, make sure to say it back to them to check your understanding. This is particularly useful for people who are very long-winded or maybe rambling in their answers because they're not trained in how to do this. And if you're saying, okay, I just heard all that stuff, my question was this, and what I'm hearing is I should do this, this, and this. Most of the time they'll be like, yes. 25% of the time they may be like, no, that is not what I said at all. That is the wrong direction. And this catches that really early so you don't go charging off in the wrong direction, and then getting help later is even harder. So, to sum up asking, here are 5 tools you can use. Picking a good team. 15-minute rule, ask early, say what you need, say what you've done, and say it back to them. So now let's talk about helping. And before we talk about helping, I want to acknowledge that this is really hard. This is a really hard thing to do. We've never taught how to do this. We're never taught how to give critical feedback effectively. We're never really taught how to be leaders. We're never taught how to be mentors. We're not taught how to be experts. We're just figuring it out as we go along. And so there are lots of pitfalls here that are very easy to fall into. It's also true that you have stuff to do, right? You have a job, and if someone comes in and interrupts you and asks you a question, it's taking away time from what you're working on otherwise. And that's really challenging. I totally want to acknowledge that up front. But teams that are really successful know that this is the job, that helping their team be successful and helping everyone work to their full capacity is the work to do. That is the role. So even though it can be really frustrating in the moment to put down your own thing and help someone else, try to take a step back and look at the big picture, and that can really help sort of like reframe that interaction. One other thing that makes this challenging is the curse of knowledge. Being an expert can actually make it very difficult to remember what it's like to not understand what a variable is. A variable is a very challenging concept to people who've never programmed before. And you can forget that very easily when you spend all day in an IDE, or the command line, or whatever. Knowing something super well makes it really hard to remember what it was like before, and that can make it very hard to help them and very frustrating. You've all probably helped people who are new to technology. My father used to help his father use his MacBook Air, and they would just end up shouting at each other on Skype about what was happening, because it was very confusing for my grandfather, and my father was having trouble explaining, because my father has used Apple products since like they were black and white and like, you know, the SE, like since the 90s, he's always been a huge Apple fan. So he couldn't remember what it was like to not use one, and that led to a lot of conflict. So think about every question you get as an opportunity to make your team stronger. Try to listen to what they're saying, and remember that you might not know where they're coming from. And when you get stumped, especially in front of other people, model not knowing. Model not knowing the answer. I have a question-asking superhero in mind when I was writing this slide, and it's a former coworker of mine named Dean, who I don't even know if he knows I'm saying this about him. But Dean was a senior engineer, and he was his title, and he was very good at, in public, in front of the rest of the engineering team, being like, so I see that you're doing this thing here, but how does this work? And then just stopping and just asking. Like, it was a totally normal question, and this blew my mind. This was a model of asking questions and not knowing something that I really hadn't seen very much in the technical community. It's really powerful and very scary, but it makes a big difference. So here are some really specific tools you can use to help. One is welcome questions. So when people ask you questions, be welcoming, smile, put down your stuff and don't look at it, and do what you can to welcome them. If you're not getting enough questions, you can reward question askers. And I don't mean with candy, but that might work too. I mean just emotionally, like be like, that's a great question, be excited about what they're working on. And you might want to read this book. This is a book called Don't Shoot the Dog, The New Art of Teaching and Training. It's a book about dog training. I read it a few years ago, and it's awesome. It's called this because if your dog is barking and you want it to stop, there are a lot of ways you can get a dog to stop barking. Method 1 is shoot the dog. The book does not recommend this method. They're like, we have 7 other methods that are better, but it is an option. You could lock your door, you could hide, you could, refuse to help someone. But there are lots of other ones. This book is also great, a little bit of a tangent here. This book is also great because for each example of the methods it talks about, it's like, here's how to use this on a dog. Here's how to use this on people. Here's how to get your spouse to pick up their laundry off the floor. You can use it on yourself too. I use it on myself, even though I know I'm doing it. If I'm like trying to add a new habit to my life, like go to the gym in the morning, if I put on my gym shoes, before the sun's up, I just go, yes. I give myself a little reward. It really works. It's very strange, but it works really well. So read this book, it's awesome. So in case you've forgotten what we were talking about here, not enough questions, reward the question asking. Give a timely, positive reward for someone who asks you questions. The flip side of that is you might be getting too many questions. You might be getting someone that's just pestering you all the time. If they're in their first few months on the job, just deal with that. If it's like really something you need to adjust, you can shape their behavior. You can teach them how to fish. You can teach them where to look for help. You can teach them to catch common errors or show them how to debug and debug more effectively. This is one that I borrowed from the Flatiron School, and they have 4 things you have to do in order before you can ask the teacher for help. Thing 1, Google it. I love thing 2. Read the error message. Surprising how often putting that there actually fixes the problem. Step 3 is ask another student, and then you can ask the teacher for help. But this is one way they've cut down on the high volume of questions that the teachers were asked, and it teaches them how to get help when they leave the program, so they're prepared to be more effective developers on their own. Another thing to keep in mind is that, and this is one I got from, I think, Dale Carnegie, who wrote How to Win Friends and Influence People, but people will always remember how you made them feel, that emotional side, and this is sort of where that little voice comes in again. So there are a few corollaries of this. One is a rule I've stolen from Hacker School, and this is where those social guide rails come in. These are basically lightweight rules to help you to not be a jerk without meaning to, because we all mean well, right? But if you're like, oh, you haven't heard of the global interpreter lock? That accomplishes nothing. It just makes the other person feel dumb for not already knowing. It doesn't inform them. It doesn't help them. It just makes that little voice a little bit louder. So try not to feign surprise. Another thing you can do is assume competence. This is one that is particularly pernicious. I found that when I am in certain environments, people assume that I'm a beginner or that I need to start learning with an easy language, and I have lots of stories about this, but assume that people are competent and know what they're doing. That goes a really long way as well. One question to help you avoid getting into this kind of a trap is, how familiar are you with blank before launching into a lecture on it? This would have come in really handy with a former coworker of mine who started explaining code I wrote to me. If he had asked and said, how familiar are you with this part of the code base? I would have said, I wrote it, and then he wouldn't have looked so dumb. So use this question. This is magical. It helps you avoid that dynamic. One other corollary of the feelings bit is to praise in public and criticize in private. This one is, again, paying attention to that little voice, and it's just really respectful. There's one quote that I love I got from Alice Bartlett's blog post about her first days at the GDS, which is a digital agency in the UK. And it's great because she's talking about how scared she was of the fridge her first week and how she doesn't remember being that scared at all. And she says, if I'm giving feedback on a pull request, I always go find the person first and check how they'd best like the feedback. Sometimes I'll offer to pair with them on it in private, email them in private, or maybe just comment on the pull request. And she thinks it's polite to give people options. So that may or may not work for your workflow, but it's something at least worth considering. One other thing you can do is to share the how and the why, not just the what. Don't just answer the question. Show them how you knew what term to type into Google. Do you know how to solve that bug because there's some concept you understand that they don't? Or is it just because you've run into that bug 100 million times before and you just have to run into it 100 million times before you know the bug? So share what your thinking is and how you're making decisions. This can really go a long way to how it's helping people solve problems on their own. This is a small one, but makes a big difference. Don't grab the steering wheel. So don't just reach over and grab their keyboard, just ask first. Just ask and you'll avoid this one. This one feels very invasive to have someone grab your keyboard from you. This one I got from the Railsbridge teacher workshop. Railsbridge is a workshop that teaches beginners Rails and Ruby on a weekend, and they have this rule. Another one is watch your language. And I don't mean swearing. I mean words like easy, just, obviously. These words are particularly infuriating if you're frustrated. I remember working with a tool that was very confusingly structured, and their documentation was completely unhelpful, and the word obviously was in it. And I actually shouted at my computer. I was like, it's not obvious! Because it wasn't. They'd done a terrible job of structuring this thing so I could figure out how to use this tool, and they put the word obviously, and it's just adding insult to injury. Because if it's obvious to you, you don't need the word obvious. And if it's not obvious to you, then you're insulting someone. So just try to remove easy, just, and obviously and those sorts of words from your explanations and your documentation especially. One other to remember is to emote in writing. Because especially with people you don't know on the internet, GitHub type discussions, like comments on pull requests and issues, if you are trying to be constructive and trying to be helpful, sometimes that can be not come across. What you say and what you're thinking and the tone you mean can be misinterpreted by someone else. I know you all know this. But just try to over-emote a little bit more. I love emojis for this. Add a little bit more encouraging words around the thing you're trying to say. This can go a really long way towards building people who will maybe become maintainers on your pull request maintainers and submit pull requests to your projects. And you can really build great community this way as well. There's one other Hacker School social rule, which is actuallys. I've heard this coming out of my mouth. Naming it is really powerful, because then when you catch yourself going, well, actually, you can go, oh no, and stop yourself from saying it. So just to be clear, a well actually is not a correction of something that matters. It's a distraction from the main topic, and it's something that comes from really good habits in software engineering. If we put a comma in the wrong place, the production server goes down. So attention to detail is really important. But if you carry that over to social situations, it can be less constructive. So when I was driving across the Golden Gate Bridge the other day, actually, it was the Bay Bridge. No one cares. You just ruined the story. So this is a particularly destructive one. The lightweight social rule there helps you not be a jerk accidentally, and this one's really great as well. So the last one I'll leave you with here is an advanced move, so use it with caution, but I would love to see more people doing this. Instead of coddling people that you think are beginners or you think are new, instead of trying to point them in an easier direction, push them. Push them a little bit farther than they think they can go. And then support them when they struggle, because they will. That's how you learn. This one can be an advanced move, because if you push them too hard or too far, it can discourage them and backfire. So use this one with caution. But if you think someone is capable of more, push them a little bit. See where their limits are and encourage them to step outside their comfort zone. So to sum up, Welcome questions. Make them feel good. Share the how and the why of how you all know all the stuff you know. Ask for the wheel before you take it. And watch your language and how you talk. It can make a really, really big difference. So, I asked you for a reason why you came in the beginning. What are you going to take home? Hopefully I've given you something you can use on Monday morning when you get back to work. And thank you so much. You've been a great audience.
So, yeah, thanks very much, Sasha. If you have any questions for her, she's going to be in the hallway, I think, and you can ask her there. And yeah, so we'll get ready for the next talk. Thanks again, Sasha.